Hello everyone, my name's Tomatoanus, also known as the Seepage King, and today we're going over an any % speedrun of Outer Wilds and how the world record holder ptminsker beats the game in under 8 minutes. PT recorded this run specifically for this video and also helped with writing the script to make sure it's all as accurate as possible. If you've never played Outer Wilds, it's a time loop game where you have 22 minutes to explore a solar system before the star at the center go boom, and you're trying to figure out what's causing the time loop. Also, if you've never played Outer Wilds, guy, you gotta go play it. It's so good, but also an experience that's super sensitive to spoilers, so there's your spoiler warning. I want to take a second to outline the starting area and sequence of the game. There's really 5 points of interest. You start the game at a bonfire, which you can return to and sleep at to pass time. There's a tower nearby with a launch pad at the top, which is where the spaceship is located. Inside the spaceship is the spacesuit, which has a jetpack on it and also comes with the scout launcher, pretty much a gun that shoots camera probes called scouts. Across from the launch pad is the observatory. There's an NPC named Hornfels at the top of the observatory, and there's a statue at the bottom of the observatory. Interacting with the statue triggers a cutscene which initiates the time loop mechanic and also begins all of the time-based stuff in the solar system. You can only interact with the statue if you have the launch codes though, which you get from talking to Hornfels. And lastly, in the center of all of this is a geyser which erupts 31 seconds after the start of the game. Okay, starting area basics covered, let's get previously on Tomatoanus.
I accidentally made a lot of me by time traveling. Minnesota guy, meet your dad. Minnesota dad. He's our new roommate. Uh-oh. And this is Chicago Guy's office. It's where he wrote Romeo and Juliet 2. Oh, he was telling me about that. I wish the world had gotten a chance to see the part where Steven Tyler has a CGI mouth. Hey, what's this NordVPN thing he has running on his computer? Oh, NordVPN is a VPN that protects your internet connection and privacy online. They also have a threat protection feature that blocks malicious websites, malware, trackers, and intrusive ads, even if you're not connected to a VPN server at the time. Let me guess, they also have a new MeshNet feature that allows you to share files, play LAN games, or access other devices directly. Yeah, how did you know that? Anyway, they also have other products like NordPass and NordLocker. NordPass is a password manager and data breach scanner that alerts you before the damage is done, while NordLocker backs up your files, syncs, and protects them so nobody can see, touch, or sell them. How are you doing this? Go to nordvpn.com/tomatoanus to save up to 70% on a 2-year deal, along with getting 4 months free and having a 30-day money-back guarantee. Again, that's nordvpn.com/tomatoanus. Minnesota guy. On trial at time court for time crimes. Be back later. Chicago guy. By the way, he kidnapped me just as you were about to be born to bring me to the present. It's kinda weird you refer to this as the present and not the future for you.
So the run starts when PT presses E to wake up at the fire, and right away he's going to run up to the geyser. There he'll wedge himself in a specific corner and pull out his signal scope, which is pretty much a telescope and signal receiver. There he lines up 2 grid squares down on the signal scope with the corner, which sets him to be facing a precise angle and is part of the setup for geyser skip. He jumps up next to the water farter without moving his mouse and moves with WASD until his reticle aligns with an intersection of some geometry so he knows he's standing in the correct spot. He uses the signal scope to zoom in on the middle of a log so he's then looking at the correct angle while standing in the right spot. This is all super precise because he walks forward as soon as the ground jizzes, and with this exact lineup, he gets blasted up to the launch pad and will land on one of the railings on its edge. Part of the fall damage calculation is the angle you impact the surface at, with you taking full damage if you hit it at 90 degrees and you taking less damage the shallower the angle. The railing he's aiming to land on is angled on top, so if his lineup is correct and he lands on the railing, he'll survive the fall. If his lineup is off though and he lands on the launch pad, then he'll die. If everything goes according to plan, he'll jump as he lands to preserve speed and enter the ship to get the spacesuit. PT will then start scout boosting, which is firing the scout launcher while he's in the air. Thanks to the launcher having kickback, he gains speed opposite the direction he's firing. He has right click bound to fire and left click bound to recall, so he can press the 2 in rapid succession to fire his next scout sooner. You can technically spam left and right click to boost repeatedly, but it's actually faster and more consistent if you press them in a rhythm. When he starts scout boosting, he'll use a tree as a visual cue to make sure he boosts in the right direction, then boosts the opposite way to smoothly slow down and drop into the observatory near Hornfels and jumps backwards as he talks to them. Hornfels gives PT the launch codes and he boosts down towards the statue where he enters the cutscene activation trigger while midair and does mask cutscene storage. The cutscene doesn't start until you touch the ground, and because he has the suit, he can fly anywhere and land to trigger the cutscene. The cutscene takes away the suit, so PT flies to the ship and activates the cutscene. That way he can just go back into the ship and get the suit again right away. He landed on a specific side of the ship so that he only needs to hold forwards to get the suit, since walking forward is faster than sideways or backward. He'll then fly down to the bonfire, do a little boost just before landing to minimize damage, and then take the fattest goddamn nap I've ever seen. When you sleep, the game visuals are turned off and the physics run as fast as possible to progress the state of the solar system. PT is sleeping here to quickly get the solar system to a point where he'll be able to access a new area. This sleeping part is a bit of a trade-off though. The longer you sleep, the faster the segment will be since you don't have to wait later on, but there's then less room for mistakes since you might miss your window. Beginners will usually sleep until around 6:45, and PT is going to sleep until around 7:08. Sometimes you can over or undersleep by around a second, and it doesn't make too big of a difference. Worth noting, because the physics are being ran as fast as possible, that means that the speed of this segment is based on your computer specs. For this reason, the speedrunning community treats this part like a loading screen with the timer pausing during it, so that people aren't at a disadvantage for solely having a slower computer. As soon as he's no longer EP, he turns around and boosts up to the ship where he'll begin flying into space towards the Ash Twin. If you're unfamiliar with ship flight or just haven't played the game in a while like myself, there's an indicator in the cockpit that shows the 6 directions of thrust. Forward, left, right, and back have a speed cap where, for example, you travel the same speed thrusting forward as you do thrusting forward and left. Up and down are exempt from this though, and you get extra thrust if you combine up or down with one of the 4 capped directions. PT uses this diagonal thrusting on his way to the Ash Twin and uses the upper half of the sun as a visual cue, with visual cues being really important for diagonal flight since you're not flying directly where you're looking. When his speed in relation to the Ash Twin is around 680 to 690, he reorients before then braking diagonally while looking at the middle of the sun as a visual cue. Staring at the sun, weirdo. The reason why he slept until when he did was to get the planets into the right alignment so he can fly straight to the Ash Twin like this and arrive during the brief window where he can use a warp tower there to enter the Ash Twin project. He's still going a little too fast, so he bonks off the surface to kill some speed and lands right next to a warp pad, being sure to have the ship's nose pulled up so one of the ship's landing legs is off the ground. PT shoots a scout ahead into the warp pad to start the warp animation slightly earlier, and through the warp pad, he turns around and jumps over to a control orb he starts moving before glancing right to turn off the artificial gravity. You lose control of the orb when it goes into the vertical segment, so he looks away and back to re-interact. He then flies to the warp core and adjusts his positioning on the fly since the opening flaps can be in different locations run to run. He grabs the warp core near the top so he can bounce off it towards the warp pad, which he shoots a scout into again for the warp animation. He'll then re-enter the ship, and remember 36 seconds ago when I said that he's sure to have the ship's nose pulled up so one of the ship's landing legs is off the ground? Being sure to have the ship's nose pulled up so one of the ship's landing legs is off the ground. The ship doesn't turn off if one of the legs is off the ground, so he doesn't have to restart the engine and saves 1.5 seconds. PT's now flying diagonally towards the dark bramble, positioning his reticle between 2 stars that go supernova right around now as a visual cue. He'll start braking when his speed is at around 1180 or so. You can enter the dark bramble at any speed, but if you come in too fast, you'll overshoot the red node that you have to fly into. Once he's in the node nice and deep like, he'll do a trick called ultimate feldsparring to avoid the 3 anglerfish without stopping at all. He'll rotate to look for a specific pointy part in the ceiling's geometry, then fly as close to the ceiling as possible to bury himself in a little nook, causing the fish to collide with each other and the walls and preventing them from getting to and eating him. He then flies straight to the vessel node, which is always in the same place, and he looks for some nearby branches as visual cues for where the node is specifically at. He's now going to use free look to hit the eject button while seated, with you losing a little time from moving too slowly if you eject too early, and you slamming into a wall and dying if you eject too late. He scout boosts to slow down a little while thrusting up to get a favorable bounce down the hall, and he'll bounce off the structure in the middle of the room up ahead to kill his momentum before activating the coordinate pillar and inserting the warp core into the structure while waiting for the coordinate pillar to rise. eyes. He then has to enter some coordinates, with them being the same every playthrough, so he has a lot of muscle memory for this. After the coordinates, he's then going to do vessel clip, which is a glitch involving the door he just entered the room through. And normally after the coordinates, you get warped down to the eye, and you then have to fly around a bit before flying down a funky space tunnel where you hit a trigger which warps you to the observatory. The collision on the door in this room doesn't load in for a second or two after you trigger the warp to the eye. PT will use a visual cue on the side of the lowering console to know when to jump and start thrusting. He'll then turn and activate the warp, which starts a timer where after a second or two, you get warped to the eye. During this brief window, he'll try and scout boost through the door before the collision loads in. If he's quick enough, this will clip him out of the area where he can then fly straight down to a loading zone. Hitting that loading zone will bring him to the observatory, just like if he had warped to the eye and done that whole thing with flying into the funky space tunnel. Vessel clip saves close to a minute for beginners, because the alternative route to this has some pretty difficult movement. For seasoned runners with optimal movement though, this clip saves only around 7 seconds. So the loading zone that he's boosting towards is pretty large, but it is possible to miss it. He uses the bridge and coil of the ship as visual cues for where to aim while boosting, and he tries to look at roughly where they meet. The closer he looks to the coil, the faster he'll reach the loading zone, but the more likely he is to miss the loading zone. After hitting the loading zone, he flies up to below where Dumbledore dies, lands in a specific spot on the railing, and looks straight up to interact/observe with the pedestal galaxy through the floor, saving like 0.2 seconds, but it looks super cool. This makes him absolutely trip balls, and he begins moving again around 18 seconds after hitting observe, using a fading galaxy in the distance as a visual cue for adjusting trajectory. His goal is to go straight down and reach the forest floor, so he's gonna scout boost to do that as quickly as possible, really trying not to hit a tree on the way down, which can lose a lot of time. Once you hit the forest floor, you typically hit a trigger that begins a minute-long cycle that needs to play out. It is possible to land outside the trigger area, but you can tell you've hit the trigger by if music starts playing. While he waits for the minute to pass, he flies to a specific spot that he identifies by a pattern on the ground. The trees in this area are going to turn into quantum trees, and quantum objects in this game disappear when you aren't looking at them, kinda like sweets when I'm your roommate. After the cycle, he'll spin to quickly and repeatedly look at and away from a cluster of 3 trees here to get them to disappear. This will cause the clone to spawn, which is part of the ending he's doing. While he waits and begins spinning, I'd just like to say real quick that I hope you're all doing well. If you're not, then please remember, as always, that there is a tomorrow and no feeling is final. You are not defined by where you're at mentally or emotionally. One day you'll be able to look back on this time and say it was strictly where you were as opposed to who you were. It's okay to reach out and talk to someone if you need. We all need help sometimes, and please remember that there is a tomorrow. Back to the run, as soon as he spots the clone, he notes how the clone passes him to know where to look for the bonfire, then spams his flashlight until the bonfire appears and he can light it, with the bonfire appearing because quantum. He then spins again to get Esker to spawn and talks to them, and then starts flying off towards the banjo, because it's time to put the band back together.
We're on a mission from God.
He stops thrusting as he approaches the banjo building so it's not illuminated. This way it's only illuminated by his flashlight when he spams it on and off, which causes the building to slowly crumble and he can make it inside to the banjo. He then flies back to the bonfire to talk to the ghost of Captain Cutler to progress the game, then does a glitch called Chert Yoink, or Choink for short. Chert's drums can be gathered from any distance while you're using the signal scope, such as where PT's standing next to Captain Cutler. He zoomed out a bit with his signal scope so the center covers more area so he can more easily yoink the drums from here. He then flies out towards the harmonica and thrusts down when he enters the fish, using the stump the harmonica is on to kill his momentum. After the harmonica, he's now flying up to the flute, using the trees as a visual cue. There's a big trigger area around the flute that slows you down, but that's only if you approach from the side of the flute. If you come up to the flute from the bottom, you don't enter the molasses zone until just as you reach the flute. He then scout boosts down to the fire and finishes talking to the Spaceful Dead, though it only really matters how fast you talk to the first person since you have until the end of a music cycle to talk to all of them. While waiting for the music to finish playing and the smoke orb to appear overhead, PT roasts a celebratory marshmallow, which reminds me, I'm always made fun of for how I pronounce some more, but I blame the movie I've watched more than any other movie in my lifetime.
Hey, you want some more?
more.
He then gets into position to jump into the smoke orb overhead by standing directly beneath it, since the trigger inside activates when the camera enters, and since the camera is aligned with your head, it's fastest to jump in from below. As soon as the last note of the song sounds out, he jumps up and thrusts into the orb, and during the final cutscene with the Big Bang, you're supposed to be locked in place and your thrusters don't move you. However, scout boosting does move you, so PT scout boosts towards the Big Bang to end the run and get consumed faster, and ideally save 0.7 seconds. Bazinga! So if you made it to the end of the run, thank you so much on behalf of both myself and PT, and I'd like to give a huge thank you to PT as well for helping make this video possible. PT is just so insanely talented at this game. Like, the run in this video was 7 minutes and 46 seconds long, just 4 seconds off of his world record. PT says that a run in the 30s is possible, but just barely, so be sure to check out his channels, links are in the description, to maybe see that 7-3x one day. And if you'd like to learn more about Outer Wilds speedruns, head on over to their page on speedrun.com where you can join their Discord server and ask any questions you have. The run is really easy to learn with there being a great tutorial series on it, and the route is pretty flexible with there being a handful of adjustments newer runners can make to make it easier. As always, this video would not be possible without my patrons, so thank you, all of you, for helping keep the channel afloat. Supporting the channel monetarily isn't necessary, but if you do, you get your name in these credits, access to videos early, and the ability to vote on future runs to be covered. Plus, if you support at a higher tier, you can get access to a couple hours of extra exclusive content every month. And lastly, as always, be sure to check out my Discord server. It's a super welcoming and inclusive place where you can come, chill, make friends, I don't know, do frickin' whatever stuff people do on Discord. None of that kitten shit though. Anyway, that's all for this video. This was an any% speedrun of Outer Wilds. I've been tomatoanus, and I hope you have an above average day.